Cool. Yeah, thanks, Nick. So the purpose of today is I'm going to go over the GitLab Environment Toolkit, which is a tool we've been using in quality for a while now, internally, and recently we've kind of moved it out to the wider audience. But also recently we've added a lot of geo work to it. So before it would set up our reference architectures, so anything from a 1K to a 50K architecture. And now we've started using it for setting up geo deployment as well. Some of you may have heard at the start there, a lot of changes did come in today into the environment toolkit. So some of what I'm showing is a little bit out of date, but it's not too bad. The main reason it shouldn't matter too much is because a lot more is still coming into the environment toolkit, and this is because, like I say, originally it was very much an internal tool, and as we make it more public, we're trying to make it more user friendly, so we're trying to change how it works. So once that's all finalized, there'll be new documentation, there'll probably be another demo of more deep dive into the environment toolkit itself. So today I'm going to go over the basics of setting up the toolkit for how, just so you can get your own environment, and then actually running the Geo Playbook. So we can have, at the end of it, we'll have a couple of sites that are actually working, and we can see kind of some of the challenges we have when trying to automate these things, some of the workarounds we do, and the difference we have between Rep Manager and Petroni. So I shall share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Since we're recording this, can you increase your font size just so it's easier to see on the YouTubes?
In theory, I'm not sure how to do that though. Sorry, I'm Mac.
Should be able to just Command plus.
Oh, okay. I was trying the scroll wheel. I'll make it a bit bigger as well. Okay, so like I say, we've got the incoming playbooks. I'm probably just gonna, so like I say, the end result of this will be the working environment. So I'm gonna running the Geo Playbook against two already existing environments. Takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm actually just going to start off by running the playbook now, and then I'll kind of go back and start talking through what's happening while it's running, so that hopefully we can finish with a working environment at the end of it. So I'll just start this now. So I'm doing two environments at the moment. I've got a Rep Manager environment, which is using a 10K for the primary and a 1K for the secondary. And then I've got a Postgres environment as well, which is using a 10K and a 3K reference architecture. So like I say, I'll just have these running in the background and we'll go over what's actually happening. So when using Get, we have our repository, which is the GitLab Environment Toolkit. If you search for Get, you won't actually find as much. It's just what we kind of call it. This is the repository, and the main part is setting up your configuration so that you can start creating your environments. We have everything documented within our actual project. So if I go to, just go here. We have all of our documentation is just straight from here. We have preparing the toolkit, building our environments, and working with Geo as well. And we have documentation for GCP, Azure, and AWS. As I say, this all works as of the alpha that was tagged today, and will be updated once we have a lot of the new changes in. So there's two main parts to the toolkit. We have Ansful and we have Terraform. So we use Terraform to spin up our environments. And in the Geo world, we have our primary and our secondary site. The easiest way when setting up any of this work is really just to copy and paste an existing config and change what you need. So we have in the primary site, so this is our 10K, each of these files just describes how many of each of these types of machine that we actually need. So we can go into something like the Postgres here, and we have 3 of these. It's a Postgres box. We have our Geo Site and Geo Deployment, which I'll show you in the variables, and we have the type of machine. So this is all for GCP at the moment, but like I say, we do have documentation for the others as well. So we follow this kind of basic folder structure of, we have our deployment name, which just call whatever you like, and then we have our primary and secondary sites within there. So when you're setting these up, like I say, you largely just copy and paste. So we have, these are all the basic architectures. So we have 10K, 5K, 3K, take one of these and start modifying it. And then the main things you need to worry about is this variables file. In here, we have our prefix. This is just a unique name for your single environment that you want to call it. There's no set pattern that it has to be. This is just whatever you want to call it. The external IP. So this is a prerequisite that you need to create within GCP. Create a static IP address that you'll be accessing your GitLab deployment from outside. So you need one for your primary and your secondary site. Your service account for GCP as well, and the relative path to where it's stored. Your GCP project, region, and then these are the 2 variables that we added for Geo specifically. So we have the concept of a Geo primary site and a secondary site, and our deployment name. So primary and secondary site are fixed, like it has to be one or the other. But again, the deployment name can be whatever. It's just how you connect your 2 machines up. So it's my Geo deployment or whatever you would have it called. So like I say, the secondary, because this is the 1K, so it's a much smaller scale. We haven't got all the machines in here. Everything actually just lives on the one box for our GitLab Rails, but we still have the same variables of saying we have a prefix for it. It's using the secondary site, and it's got the same Geo deployment variable. And this one's in Europe. So just if you didn't see, the first one's in US East 1C, and the secondary is in Europe. So we have them in different locations. Not that that's required for Geo, but I suppose it's just the point of it. So that's the 10K, 1K. There's no difference really between the 3K. The only difference is we've got a different external IP address and we've got a different deployment name. Interestingly, because we do Rep Manager and Patroni, if you were doing this for Patroni, the Postgres, you can't have a secondary cluster on with Rep Manager 3. So we would just lower this down to 1. But because we're using Patroni on the 3K, we can leave that at 3 and everything's fine. Ansful works very much the same way. We have our inventories. So these, again, this is the only bit you need to worry about. Everything outside of these folders is just standard in the sense of you don't need to change it. If you set up the inventory and the Terraform config correctly, you just need to run one command and everything works. So we have our Geo 10K, 1K, and our 10K, 3K. In here, we have the primary, the secondary, but we also have an all. And the reason for this is because when we set up for a Geo deployment, we set up the primary and the secondary originally as 2 separate environments. So they don't know anything about each other at that point. So I suppose it was to change the environment toolkit as little as possible. We treat them as 2 completely separate things. And then we have this all, which is actually how we fetch all the machines so that we can then set up Geo. So again, within primary and secondary, we only have 2 files. We have our inventory file, which we get for GCP, which this here is really the most important part. That's how we find the machine. That's how we know which machines belong to our 10K. And we have the service account file again. And the only difference here is that this one is how we find the 3K. Again, we have our vars. So here we're telling it that we're using GCP. This is our, again, unit name. It needs to match what was in Terraform, because if there's a difference, I believe the bucket name will fail at that point. Like you have to have a bucket pre-existing in GCP. So if your prefixes are different, Terraform would have created a bucket called one thing, and Ansful will be looking for something else. The GCP project name. We have our Ansful user, this is just this is generated for us. We have a SSH key pair, and when we upload it, we get back a unique ID for it. So this is just the value of that. So then we just have paths to our key files, our service account file, a GitLab license. If you haven't got a license, it will everything still works. It's just a standard installation. Our external URL. On this one, we're using Patroni, so we've got that set, and we have a file which is our initial password. This is actually generated for us if we don't set it, or we can actually set this. Some of the new changes that are actually coming in is we're removing this. At the moment, like say, if you don't set it, it will generate it for you. But some of the new changes as we make this public are actually that you define all your passwords in this file. And the reason for that is just then that people can then, we're not restricting that we generate passwords using Ansful. You can generate your passwords however you want to. You can set them in this file, and then it's completely up to you. We're not like controlling how that is, whereas before we very much just kind of had our defined passwords that never changed. So that's one of the smaller changes that's coming in. And then we have our all. So like say primary and secondary only worry about their one individual site, whereas the all is the one that looks across both. So this one actually looks across, instead of using here we use a node prefix, which is the prefix that we define. Whereas on this one, we use our Geo deployment, which is the deployment name that we make. And I'll show you these where we get these values from within GCP as well. And then this is pretty much the same. It's just a stripped down version. We don't need all the variables that we have in the previous versions. We just have the main difference is that we have the concept of an external and the secondary external URL. So as mentioned, like I say, the documentation does quite a good job of explaining how to set up the service account, the SSH key pair, all of that information is in there. So it's the best place to use to follow through. So if I actually go to my GCP project for this, the only thing I've pre-done for this demo is I've created the 4 environments essentially that I'm going to be using. And the reason for that is because it takes about 45 minutes from start to finish to create these environments. So I wouldn't be able to show you anything working if I did it as part of the demo. So this is our GCP project. And all I was going to show you in here is just simply that we have all these labels on our machines, and this is what ties up to our inventory file that we have here. So this is what ties up to like the node prefix. We have the.
Sorry, Nick, any chance you could zoom in just a little bit more?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, we have the GitLab node prefix on here, which is what we're using to filter by. I'm sorry, I'm making that a bit more complicated by showing you a different VM to what I'm showing on the screen. So we're looking for Geo 10K 1K secondary, and that's the GitLab node prefix of this machine and every machine that is in that that site. And then we have our node type. So this just tells us what's the purpose of this machine. So this one's an elastic box. We have the level, which is primary and secondary. Basically, we have, if it's got a 1 at the end, it's a primary. If it's anything other than a 1, it's a secondary. And then we have our, so this is the Geo Site. So again, this is what determines primary or secondary. We have our full role. This is quite useful when we're trying to identify easily what a machine does and where it lives. So this is all this is actually a combination of the Geo Site and the node level and the role pretty much. So it's like here we have our Geo, it's part of the Geo primary site and it's an elastic secondary. So this one label tells us everything we need to know where we need to put certain config. And then we have the deployment name. So this is everything that we use. And if you haven't used our Terraform modules and you'd created your own infrastructure, if you had these labels on it, then that's how Ansful would then be able to pick it up and use it. So these are the kind of key bits for that. Let's have a quick look how these are doing. 1 second, that's not very promising. So oops. I just skipped everything. For some reason, like I say, it finished after 1 second, which is a bit strange. I've honestly run this about 4 times today, and it's been fine. Dot. Okay, let's try. Did I break something? Sorry, for some reason, literally something has just changed.
Take your time. This thing always pops up when you're in the middle of an actual demo versus when you prep. Don't worry
honestly,
about
I've
it.
run this 3 times today and it's been fine. And now all of a sudden it's something has just gone off and changed on me. I can carry on going over some of the geo work and I can worry about that later rather than waiting for now, I think. Because I can at least try and show the theory of what it should do. So yeah, once you have your 2 working environments, we have 2 basic ways of running it. So once you've set up your files and your Terraform files, you just need to run, again, like we have these things documented, you just need to run Terraform apply to create all the infrastructure, and then you run your Ansible command to actually to put GitLab into the right places. So you can do that through, we have 2 ways of doing it. We have the Ansible, just standard Ansible way of you can go into the Ansible directory. If I go down here, like I was, you can do Ansible playbook, point to your inventory file. So because we have 2 environments, we would have our primary and our secondary. So we would have to run this command twice. But because the 2 environments are completely separate, you can run them both at the exact same time. You haven't got to wait for one to finish before the other. So you can spin up both the primary and the secondary at the same point. We also have a Ansible deployer. It's a simple Ruby script. And like I say, when you create these environments from scratch with the all command, it does everything sequentially. So it can take about 45 minutes, maybe longer if your networking is a bit slow. All the deployer script does is run them in parallel. So it's just running the Ansible commands, but it's running multiple at the same time. And the main benefit of that is that it takes a lot less time. Normally it'll be just over 20 minutes to complete. And like say, when you're doing this as part of testing, like today I've done this 3 times, it saves a lot of time not having to wait for it to all go one after the other. So when you're running this, that's just one of those options you've got. You can just run the all and let it go, or you can use the parallel to do it. And with the parallel, it just prints out the time, and then it puts everything into this logs structure, which is what I've been using here, because it's quite useful with the all. You can often lose it to the console history, so it's quite useful just to have this log structure as well. So once that finishes, for standard GitLab environment, that's it. You'll have your working environment. That will be set up for you. So you'll have, this is our secondary site and this is the primary site. So all of that will be done for you. And at that point, you can use them if you so wish, if you're not doing Geo. But then for Geo, we have our GitLab role. So this is just, if I go into here, we have our GitLab Geo Role, which is, this is a completely separate playbook, and it's for the point of, like, say, you have two working environments and you do this afterwards. That's why it's not done as part of the all. We don't treat it as the same. It's something that you do to your environment after the fact, after it's already done and it's working. And this, the aim of this was to follow the documentation as best as it could. So naming, structure, and everything that I've used is trying to follow this documentation. So we have all the templates. So this is where the config is going to go. So we have the primary database config, the read-only replica. So all of these are just, they pretty much should match titles that we use within the documentation. So it should be quite easy to match up with the documentation if you are following this through. And it's the same for our tasks folder. We have our main file. These names here, like configure the primary app servers, again, they match up to our documentation of how we call things. And the whens that we have here is how we identify where that config goes. So this goes to our GitLab Rails box or a sidekick box that lives in the Geo primary site. Again, here we have Postgres for the Geo primary site. And this one's a bit more complicated in that we have, if you're doing a single node where you don't have a Postgres box, then that's saying if we don't have a primary site Postgres, then put it onto GitLab Rails. So this is how we kind of configure up where our config lives. And for the most part, for Rep Manager, it's very much just, we go through this, we use everything as documented, and it's great. For Patroni, we have a few workarounds in there. And the importance of these workarounds is we put these things in as workarounds at the moment because we can't really say that you can't build a Patroni environment and test it because it's not finished. It kind of defeats the purpose. So we put these workarounds in, but we want to make sure that we have issues raised that point out that this isn't ideal and this needs fixing. So I can give you a good example of that at the moment for Patroni. We have this whole file, which is just a workaround. And we highlight at the top why this is needed, what kind of the error was, and a link to an issue where we're actually saying this should be fixed. And this is required at the moment because when you set up Patroni originally, it creates its own cluster because it's a separate working environment. And when you tell it to join the primary, the secondary will complain because it's already part of its own cluster and it doesn't match the new cluster. So what we do here is we delete the Postgres data, we remove Patroni from its own cluster, and then we do a reconfigure and start it up again. And that kind of makes it think it's new and it joins the cluster quite happily. But we have an issue raised to say, obviously, this isn't how we want this to go. This command specifically as well is obviously quite bad. So we're using the Patroni command line directly. And through Ansful, we have this expect command. This command has no force. So we have to tell it that wait for this to appear on the command line and respond with this answer. Then wait for this and respond. So it's a very brittle process of automation of saying we actually have to wait for a response so that we can then fill it in. thankfully, there's modules that do this for us, but this is kind of part of the point of what we highlighted as saying this needs, we should handle this. We should handle within GitLab removing from the cluster and just joining it as part of a standard reconfigure or whatever it may be. So yeah, this workaround is the biggest one we have to do, but then we have other ones where we have issues raised for the replication password. So through Rep Manager, we have a nice command, very nice and easy. Through Patroni, that command just doesn't work. So we have to go directly to the database. So again, we have an issue raised for that to say that this needs fixing. And
Nick,
we also,
sorry, I just want to say we're a couple minutes away from time here.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, like the main thing, and that's kind of, it's the good thing about getting these things into the toolkit, because it allows us to highlight what isn't an ideal process. If we can't easily automate it, it's not easy for a customer to do. And so yeah, that's really not ideal. Now the aim was to obviously show you the working environment, which unfortunately I won't be able to do, but what I will do is I'll work out what's going wrong. I'll spin up the environment and I'll email out the links to them so you can take a look by all means and see what's going on there. There's still a few caveats with this that we need to fix, kind of like, we want to get in kind of zero downtime upgrades. We want to fix like the current upgrade process works, but not very nicely. So we want to fix these kind of things. Multiple secondaries. At the moment, we work on a one-to-one basis. So it'd be great to have like one-to-many, so we can have as many secondaries as we like. Make these more reference-like. At the moment, we just stitch, we just put a 10K and a 3K together. We might be wasting resources on the secondary because it's not doing everything that a normal 3K would. So we might be able to actually say a more reference-like Geo environment. So those are kind of some of the things that we want to do with this in the future. I think that's for the most part. Yeah. I was going to show you it working, of course, but I can't. So if there's any questions, I'll have you answer them before we wrap up.
How come you don't have the GitLab.com infrastructure in here?
It's very big. I did see it, and we certainly could try, but yeah, it's very complex.
Thanks for the demo, man. I appreciate it.
Cool. Like I say, once we have more changes incoming to get to as we open this up, so there will be a more in-depth detail of how Get works, how we can use this with pipelines, and everything like that. And yeah, we will have pipelines that we'll be using to set up our Geo deployment as well. So
awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for the overview. Yeah, I'd like to keep following up with more demos as changes keep coming into the Git. So I think this is the start of hopefully a series, and I thought it was a great overview. So really appreciate it. And just we have a channel in Slack, right? If folks have more questions, I think GitLab Environment, GitLab_Environment _Toolkit. Is that right?
yes. I'm trying to see where it was. We do.
GitLab _environment _toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.